The bedroom door was locked from the inside. The window was sealed shut with paint that hadn't been opened in years. But 7-year-old Mason Bradley was gone, and there was no explanation that made any sense. His mother, Rebecca Bradley, had checked on him at exactly 9:15 that night. She kissed his forehead, tucked the covers around his small body, and whispered goodnight. 45 minutes later, when she returned to turn off the hallway light, her son had vanished into thin air. The Bradley family lived in a quiet neighborhood in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. It was the kind of place where children rode their bikes until sunset and neighbors waved from their porches. Nothing bad ever happened there, and nothing unusual ever occurred. Until March 14th, when the impossible became reality inside a modest 2-story home on Maple Street. Mason was a typical second grader who loved dinosaurs, chocolate milk, and building elaborate Lego structures. He had sandy brown hair, a gap-toothed smile, and an imagination that often carried him to far-off worlds. His parents, Rebecca and Daniel Bradley, had been married for 12 years and were ordinary people living an ordinary life. The night Mason disappeared started like any other evening. The family ate dinner together at 6 o'clock, and Mason finished his homework by 7:30. He took a bath, brushed his teeth, and asked his mother to read him a story about a brave knight on a quest. By 9 o'clock, Mason was already half asleep. When Rebecca returned to his room and found the bed empty, she assumed he had gone to the bathroom. She checked, but the bathroom was dark and empty. She called his name softly, not wanting to wake her husband who was working late in the garage, but there was no answer. She searched the kitchen, the living room, and the basement, but Mason was nowhere to be found. Daniel rushed inside when he heard his wife's frantic calls. Together, they searched every corner of their home, checking closets under beds, behind furniture, and inside every space a child could possibly hide. The front door was still locked with the chain in place. The back door alarm was still armed, and every window on the first floor was secured. Mason's bedroom presented the deepest mystery of all. The door had been locked from the inside using a small latch that Mason himself had installed for privacy, and Daniel had to use a screwdriver to open it from the hallway. The window had been painted shut 3 summers ago and showed no signs of being forced open. There was simply no way out of that room. The police arrived within 15 minutes of Rebecca's desperate call. Officer Patricia Moreno was the first on the scene, followed quickly by 2 more patrol units. They conducted a thorough search of the property, including the attic, the garage, and the backyard shed, but there was no sign of the missing boy. Detective James Hartwell took over the case the following morning. He was a 20-year veteran with a reputation for solving impossible cases, but this one troubled him from the start. The locked room scenario defied all logic because children don't simply vanish from sealed spaces. There had to be an explanation, and he was determined to find it. The investigation revealed something unusual in the days that followed. Mason had been drawing strange pictures at school for the past 2 weeks, and his teacher, Mrs. Patterson, provided the drawings to police. They showed a figure hiding in shadows, watching from corners, always present but never clearly visible, and when asked about the drawings, Mason had simply said he was drawing his new friend. Rebecca's heart nearly stopped when she heard this information. She remembered Mason mentioning a friend named Charlie several times recently, and she had assumed Charlie was an imaginary companion, something many children his age created. But the drawings suggested something far more disturbing, and someone had been watching her son, perhaps communicating with him without anyone knowing. Forensic teams discovered faint scratches near the ceiling of Mason's closet. Upon closer inspection, they found a small panel that had been carefully removed and replaced, and behind that panel was an opening to a crawl space that ran between the walls of the house. The space was barely 18 inches wide, too narrow for an adult, but just large enough for a small child. The crawl space led to a forgotten section of the attic that was inaccessible from the main attic entrance. Inside this hidden space, investigators found a small nest of blankets, empty food wrappers, and children's books that didn't belong to Mason. Someone had been living inside the walls of the Bradley home, and they had taken the boy with them when they left. Detective Hartwell followed the crawl space to its end point, which opened into a section of the basement behind the water heater. A small window near the foundation had been carefully modified, allowing it to swing open despite appearing sealed from the inside. This was how the intruder had come and gone without detection, and this was how Mason had been taken from his own bedroom. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community, and the idea that someone could live hidden inside a family's home was terrifying beyond comprehension. Neighbors began checking their own walls and attics while parents installed additional security measures. The sense of safety that had defined Cedar Rapids was shattered completely. 3 days after Mason's disappearance, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A gas station attendant 20 miles outside of town remembered a man and a young boy who had stopped for fuel late on the night of the disappearance. The man seemed nervous, the attendant recalled, and the boy appeared sleepy but unharmed. Security footage confirmed the sighting. The man was identified as Robert Crane, a former contractor who had worked on the Bradley home 5 years earlier. He had installed new insulation in the attic during a renovation project, and investigators realized he must have discovered the hidden crawl space during that work. His motive remained unclear, but his obsession with the Bradley family became evident as the investigation deepened. Crane had lost his own son to a custody battle years before, and court records showed he had been denied all visitation rights after exhibiting erratic behavior. Psychologists who later examined his belongings believed he had been searching for a replacement, someone to fill the void his own child had left behind. Mason, with his friendly nature and trusting personality, had become his target. The manhunt intensified across 3 states as every law enforcement agency received Crane's photograph and vehicle description. Tips poured in from concerned citizens throughout the region. On the 5th day, a farmer in rural Wisconsin reported seeing a car matching the description parked behind an abandoned barn on his property, and officers surrounded the location at dawn. Mason was found alive inside the barn, wrapped in a sleeping bag, confused but physically unharmed. Crane was apprehended without resistance, seemingly relieved that the running was over, and he offered no explanation for his actions. He spoke only to ask if Mason would be taken care of properly, and his disconnect from reality was apparent to everyone present. The reunion between Mason and his parents was captured by local news cameras. Rebecca collapsed to her knees when she saw her son walking toward her, and Daniel lifted the boy into his arms and held him so tightly that officers had to gently remind him to let Mason breathe. The family stood together in the parking lot of the police station, crying tears of relief and gratitude. Mason required months of therapy to process what had happened to him. He struggled with nightmares and developed a fear of closed spaces that would take years to overcome, but children are remarkably resilient. With the love and support of his family, Mason slowly began to heal and returned to school the following fall, welcomed by classmates who treated him like a returning hero. Robert Crane was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for kidnapping. During his trial, psychiatric experts testified about his deteriorating mental state and his delusional belief that he was rescuing Mason from an unhappy home. The defense argued for compassion, but the jury saw only a man who had terrorized a family and stolen a child from his bed. The Bradley family eventually moved away from Cedar Rapids, unable to live in a home that held such dark memories. They settled in a new city in a new house, where they checked every wall and sealed every crawl space before moving in. The experience had changed them forever, making them both more cautious and more grateful for every moment together. Rebecca often thought about that terrible night when her son vanished from behind a locked door. She remembered the panic, the confusion, and the absolute certainty that her world was ending. But she also remembered the moment Mason was returned to her arms, and that memory became her source of strength. Some nightmares do end, she would later tell other parents, and sometimes the missing are found. Mason is now a teenager who rarely speaks about what happened to him, and when asked, he simply says he was lost for a while but found his way home. The experience taught him that safety is never guaranteed and that the people who love us are the only true protection we have. He hugs his parents a little longer now and never takes an ordinary day for granted. The house on Maple Street still stands, occupied by a new family who knows nothing of its history. The hidden crawl space has been sealed permanently with concrete, and the small bedroom where a boy once vanished has been painted bright yellow, filled with toys belonging to another child. Life continues, as it always does, even in places touched by darkness. But somewhere in Cedar Rapids, older residents still remember the week when a child disappeared from inside his own home. They remember the fear that gripped the community and the relief when he was found alive. And they remember the lesson that tragedy taught them all, that evil doesn't always come from outside. Sometimes it hides in the walls, waiting in the shadows, closer than anyone ever imagines.